Start the recording job. Hi. So now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dori Gilbert, who is also a former boot camper. So Dori, thank you for joining us. And Dori is going to be talking about listening and listening intelligence in meetings and interviews. And interviews, it's so important to make sure that we're listening, not with what we want to say next, but really to absorb what people are saying so that we can respond really intelligently and thoughtfully and not let our fear brain go. And so, Dori, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thanks a lot, Christy. I really appreciate you having me today. It's an honor to speak to fellow boot camp graduates, and glad to be sharing this topic with you. It's just so important. And give me a minute to get my presentation.
Dori, you're muted. Dori, you're muted.
There we go.
There.
So today we're talking about taking flight from the hot seat, and this is about in meetings and interviews when all eyes are on you and you need to either convince or really ace the interview. So this is about taking flight from that place in meetings and interviews. And glad to be here and join you. Let's just talk a little bit about being heard and listening. So everybody has a range of information that they filter in and out as they listen. So we're going to be talking about that because most people want their perspective to be heard. So we have these two things sort of competing at each other. People filter out information and filter only in just not everything, but everybody wants their perspective to be heard. So how can we help others to be heard? And that is about expanding your listening intelligence. And so the idea is that listening improves the more you and others are being heard. And so we're going to go over listening and listening intelligence first, and then I'll share how to apply it so that you can convince in meetings and ace an interview. So first of all, I wanted to mention that I have prepared a little action guide that we're going to send out to you afterwards. And this reiterates all the content from this presentation. And then it also gives you some follow-up actions so that you can improve your listening. You can improve your position from the hot seat. So you don't need to worry about taking screenshots or anything. The content is going to be all in there. Now, on the ECHO organization is the certifying body that is certified me in listening intelligence. And they have found that on average at work, we retain just about 25% of what we hear. And it's just due to busyness and a lack of listening skills. And this is costing businesses, small and medium businesses, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I know. So 70% of businesses say that the ineffective communication is the underlying problem for things like productivity. I was so surprised to see this statistic that in the small, medium businesses, 17 and a half hours a week are spent clarifying miscommunications. And again, the cost of that is hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. And then this leads to lower engagement and turnover. So businesses that are communicating effectively reduce their turnover rate by 55% of the average. So what do you know about listening? I just want you to kind of share what you know, what you think about listening in the chat. If you have some ideas or comments about listening, go ahead and put those in chat. And do I need to pull up chat or? A lot of times, yes, people mention active listening, and that is something that we've been taught. It focuses on the behaviors that we should engage in so that our listening isn't passive, but really active, involved in with what the speaker is saying. Listening intelligence focuses on habits rather than behaviors. And then it says, well, we can change those habits. Anything else coming up in chat? Cindy, Amber?
Oh, you're not able to see it. Yeah, there's lots of participation. Um, Hearing is not the same as listening. Active listening skills. This is what I heard you say. Active versus passive. Um, Stress and fatigue will reduce your listening effectiveness.
Yes,
Um,
that's a really good one, is that um, this listening can change per our situation. If we are experiencing other things at work that are bothering us or taking our focus, we might listen differently if we're stressed. Or that is a really good point, because listening can be situational. And um, Allie says, that involving feelings and empathy is good. And there's one listening style I'm going to tell you about that does that naturally. So that's really good too. A couple of people are talking about ADHD. I I don't think so. I don't have any specific recommendations, but I would love your feedback if you're on what, after you hear more about listening intelligence, and if it kind of helps you in your sort of ADD brain, because it could be related, but I am not sure. We also had a comment about replying to others what you've really, really good, and we can talk, that's one of the strategies. And body language. And I think that's the last one I'll talk about is body language, because I'm glad you asked that, because I want to be sure to talk a little bit about body language. There's 4 primary listening habits, and each one of them has different body language, and some unexpectedly they might indicate listening to you, but really this person may not be listening. So let's take a closer look at listening intelligence. Thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions. All right, so active listening skills, like I said, is really the behaviors and the techniques. And here's an example, because listening intelligence contributes to the dynamic of being able to make your listening active versus passive. So for example, an active listening technique is don't rehearse your response while the other person is talking. Well, in listening intelligence, we know that different listening styles have different interests in receiving information. Like I said, filtering in and out certain information. So the dynamic behind this is, if you do find yourself doing this, to learn the underlying causes and strategies for adjusting your interest level. So that's an example of how it contributes to active listening. So what is listening intelligence? Well, ECHO stands for Effective Communication for Healthy Organizations. So we're really talking about listening at work. And listening is a brain-based function. And the ECHO system typifies listening habits. We can have 10 people go into a meeting and come out with 10 different things that were heard. right? And this is why, is because there's this filter going on. But when we do know that we can develop an ability to shift those habits for improving our communication outcomes. And so this awareness and this ability that we can learn is what we call listening intelligence. Now, it begins with an assessment, and there's 10 force ranking questions with 4 choices each. They take just a few minutes. The algorithm is analyzing 60 data points. If you have more questions about this, definitely contact me and ask about the echo validity research. So where this assessment falls into the assessment and landscape is we have personality assessments. And this is like Myers-Briggs, Clifton Strengths, which I'm a huge fan of. Now these analyze your internal values, your motivations. So it's really a psychological or personality profile. Then there's behavioral assessments. So these are patterns of external behavior, not your internal values. And this is like DISC or social styles. Then your cognitive assessments measure preferences based on how the brain processes information, and that's where echo fits in. So once you finish the assessment, then we get an echo profile report. So it assesses your listening preferences based on 4 main listening habits: connective, reflective, analytical, and conceptual. And we'll review those a little bit. When you combine those, like some people are single dominant, some people dual dominant, some people triple dominant, there's 41 profiles or combinations of those 4 habits. So for individuals, I review this with you in a 60-minute session, and I train you on the different listening styles, what to look for in others, and what actions to apply for yourself and working with others of different styles. And I do the same thing for teams, and that's a 1.5 to 3 hour session where I go into training each individual team member's profile, and then the team profile, and then strategies on how to improve communication outcomes. So this is when you can recognize others' listening preferences, then you can improve how you're speaking to them. So the report is grounded in these 4 primary listening habits, and I kind of shaded this out because I don't want you to try to read it. We're going to go over it. And we're going to go over a summary of the 4 styles, but basically we go into this in depth in one of these sessions. So I give you the dominant characteristics of each of the 4 styles, the strengths, the challenges, body language. I give you your listening profile and ideas to help you in your listening challenges, and then strategies to help you communicate with other listening styles. And my story is I learned about this from a friend, and he told me my style and said, well, what challenges do you have? And I said, well, I have a lot of trouble listening when there's large amounts of detail. I start tuning out. And he gave me some strategies about really speaking up sooner. And so I actually had an opportunity within a week to test it out. My brother has a different job than me. There's a lot of codes and things in his profession, and he was visiting me unplanned. And he can get really deep into, he's passionate about his job, but I would kind of just gently stop him and say, hey, you're 3 tangents in, could you come back to your main point? Or I would say, I'm feeling really saturated. Can you get back to the first thing that you were talking about? So that helped so much. Normally at the end of like a 6-hour period of time that I was with him, I would have felt just exhausted and saturated and unable to process information, but I wasn't. I was fresh and ready to go for more at the end of the day. So this is one thing that really convinced me that the Echo Listening Intelligence System was a great system, and I got certified in it. So let me summarize these 4 main habits or styles, or we might also say preferences. So there's 2 that are people oriented and 2 that are information oriented. And connective listeners, these are your other people-oriented folks. So they're going to be listening for information that applies to others or the experience of others. Like, oh, I wonder how that will affect blah, blah, blah. So they're good at stakeholder insights. And they're the people that know, the names of all the children and the dogs of people. They're just very other people-oriented. The reflective folks, they are the ones that they take in information and in context of their own experiences of the past. They contain in their head like a database of these past experiences. So you might recognize these people because they're quiet, they're pausing, they're thinking. And what they're doing is they're kind of doing a database compare and saying, well, have I experienced something like that before? And then we have two information-oriented listening styles. Analytical folks are unbiased and accurate details. And these people are good at keeping you on track for schedule and budget. They're going to understand the data and make sure it's credible. So that's what their focus is on, and that's what they're hearing. And then conceptual are your idea folks. They're listening for ideas. They're also might be developing ideas in their head, and they're thinking about future possibilities. So those are the four main. We're going to get into it a little more. The body language, here's where we're going to get into body language. Our connective folks by habit are people-oriented, right? So they might be giving you eye contact and leaning in by habit. It doesn't necessarily mean they're listening. And I'll give you some cues later about how to tell if they're disengaged. And then reflectives, I love this photograph for reflective because it perfectly represents they're reflecting on the past. They might be looking at the horizon. Crossed arms does not mean they're not listening. It means they're processing probably. They might even be leaning back. They might look disengaged to you, but they really are engaged. Now, if you're connective, use your warmth in meetings to make sure that everyone is included. If you're engaging with someone who's a connective listener, make sure to share insights about stakeholder like preferences and interests. Now, if you're reflective, you can help teams stay grounded in meaning or purpose. Like, we set this purpose, this is our history. They can be the team historian. And you can engage a reflective listener by asking them about their experience. So if for information-oriented folks, the analytical body language is in a meeting room. It's hard to tell on Zoom, but in a meeting room, they're the ones that sit in the back or off to the side, away from the speaker. They're not interested in sitting next to the most influential person. Whereas the connective would want to sit right next to the speaker or the vice president or the boss or something like that. They want to stay impartial. If you're engaging with an analytical, be sure to offer some data and statistics. And if conceptual body language is movement, the analytical are often still, they might be looking at their computer, taking notes, but they're still. The conceptual, which I'm using my hands. You can't see my foot tapping, but when I'm listening and speaking, I'm a lot of times in motion. And they're the ones that have to go up to the board and draw and write. And so that's the conceptual listener body language. So if you're conceptual, you can use your vision of the future and possibilities to ask stimulating questions. And if you're engaging with a conceptual listener, be sure to give them the big picture and the vision. I'm hoping you're getting a sense of the four types We're not going to go into too much detail. There's things you can do. You can go to my website, and this link is in that action guide, and you can read the information on listening intelligence there. There's a video, and I detail the 4 habits in much more detail. You can sign up for an individual session on the website, and you can request for me to assess and train your whole team. All right. So the summary of listening intelligence is not everyone hears everything that is said. Listening is a brain-based system of habits, and it filters in and filters out certain information. And you can make adjustments for these habits when you're wanting to get your message heard. And now we're going to apply it to the hot seat. So we can see how listening intelligence can help you convince in meetings or ace an interview. All right, we're going to take flight. We're going to learn some lessons from Peacock about developing confidence. We're going to learn some lessons from Hummingbird about maintaining agility. And we're going to learn some lessons from Parrot on mirroring the other's interest. I don't see how to get to chat. Just a second. So I'm not seeing that if you guys, oh, here we go. Let me pull chat to my other screen. That might help. All right. Somebody asks if there's possible to toggle between a different listening style. Yes. And that is one thing that we can learn by listening intelligence is different situations might call for different things. If you have trouble listening to details, maybe write them down while somebody's giving details. If you're not really interested in stakeholder insights, but somebody's sharing that, again, do things to help you listen. Maybe writing them down, taking notes on that is a really good one. If you don't typically hear ideas of the future, or you dismiss them and say, oh, they're just a dreamer, maybe, out some of those things, test yourself and see if you can kind of suss out the concepts that somebody's talking about, maybe even connecting concepts from the meeting. So you can test yourself and practice different things to make sure that you are stretching and expanding your range of what you're listening to. A great question. Thank you. All right, here we go. We're going to start with lessons from Peacock. And what we're going to talk about is preparing with confidence. Know who's in the room. So at work, you've had time to observe over time your coworkers, or you can ask about them. If there's one person in the room you really need to convince, you spend a little time getting to know them and their interests and their objectives. Create answers that align with their objectives and interests. So make sure you're prepared to address those. And when you do address them, be concise and clear. So preparation helps you with that clarity and conciseness. You've probably heard, it's easy to write 1,000 words, but if you boil that 1,000 words down into 100 words, it's really, really hard to boil that 100 words down into 25 words. So it takes time, and it takes thought, and it takes preparation. The more you can prepare, the more you'll build your confidence. And if you have a strategy in place to handle your most difficult person in the room, then you can at least address your comments and frame things in a way that that person can hear them. Secondly is speak with confidence. Reducing filler words. I think that's so funny. I just said, reducing filler words. Ironic. Pause and relax. And when you're in an interview and you're on the hot seat, it's good to remember as you prepare to say, remember to pause, maybe write yourself a little sticky note, or if you're on a virtual meeting or interview that says pause or smile or relax. And it's, there's a lot of good reasons to pause too, because the reflective listeners in the room might be cooking up something to say. They're taking time to say it. Balance concepts and details. So you can go into detail and then come back with some concepts, and then go into detail and come back with some concepts. And this way you'll go back and forth between those who love detail and those who want just the high level. And but you do need both when you're convincing. When you're telling stories in an interview, you don't want to make your answers too long. So just think about that. But you do want to get into a story that shows that you can do, or that you did accomplish what they're asking about. In the Echo Listening Report, we give you some information, and this is the working with. So this happens to be from a listening profile called the Scrutinizer. And the Scrutinizer is actually single dominant in analytical, scrutinizing data and information that people are sharing with them. So there's 4 of these in the report, one for every listening type. And it really shows you when the 2 of you are at your best, how you work together, the possible challenges that the 2 of you might have, and it gives suggestions on what you can do. So in addition to these personalized working with summaries, the Echo report also provides 8 pages of detailed characteristics of each primary habit. So 2 pages per each primary habit. This is some great homework for you to do, to be able to prepare when you know the listening style of the other, of the key people in the room. Then you can prepare using the report. All right, we're going to learn some lessons from Hummingbird now. And I want to share with you some hummingbird facts. All right, so hummingbirds can hover in midair at flowers and feeders, and they're the only bird that can fly backwards. Their wings move in a figure-8 pattern, which allows them to maneuver with ease. So it's not the speed of the wing that allows a hummingbird to hover, it's the structure of their wing joints. And hummingbirds can rotate or twist the upper arm bones to invert their wings as they flap. So this lifts them in the air on both the upstroke and the downstroke. The result, they're the most agile birds on the planet. They beat their wings more than 50 times per second and even faster in extreme flight mode. They're also among the fastest flyers for their size, reaching speeds of up to 37 miles per hour and up to 60 miles per hour in courtship dives. And they need to eat every 10 to 15 minutes to maintain their speed and metabolism. But the point here is that hummingbirds are very agile. And listening intelligence offers some agility opportunities. So if there's really one thing I want you to take away today, no matter what style you are, is that listeners don't hear everything. And it's an opportunity to repeat, to be compassionately repeat what you've already said, even if it's the first, fifth, third time that you've said it. And so if you are the listener and you don't hear everything, it's okay to ask for something to be repeated. And a second opportunity is that an audience's line of questioning indicates listening style. So the opportunity is to develop a rapport. So you're listening to the kinds of questions they ask. What was the data that said that? Where did you hear that? They're asking about the credibility. Where they're asking about where's the spreadsheet or things like that. Do they really want the data? They're taking you back to the schedule, the baseline, that kind of thing. And this is an opportunity for you to say, oh, they are analytical. Let me make sure I get them data and tell them that and start developing rapport with them. So look for signs in engagement and disengagement. So there's an opportunity to make sure you're on the same page. If you've identified somebody in a meeting that's the most important, the decision maker that you really need to win over, and they're going to show signs of disengagement, look for that and get them back disengaged. Ask them clarifying questions, or give them something of their interest and ask them to confirm. The other opportunity is to respect silence. So like the reflective listener or the analytical listener might be a little more quiet and still. And then respect movement. So the conceptual listeners might be all over the place. When I presented to a team and there was two people on one side and the third person on the same side of a big conference room, and my foot's tapping away. And when I brought this up, that conceptuals move a lot, she said, I noticed you tapping, and I just automatically think, oh, somebody's not engaged or somebody's not interested. And I'm like, no, I'm listening, I'm speaking, I'm engaged, and my foot is going. So these are some opportunities to be agile within your meeting or interview. Here's a few disengagement cues. So for connective, remember I told you they might even be giving you active listening signs, like looking at you, straight at you, leaning forward, but they're going to show that they're disengaged because they're passively agreeing on everything. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, yeah. So that is, they're disengaged. A reflective, they might take the leaning back, crossing arms, not engaged thing too far. And so they might appear like aloof or self-centered. Like, well, I think, well, in my experience, they might be speaking up, but it's all about, sounds like it's all about them. They're really just trying to bring their experience. But if they're overdoing it, it might be a sign of disengagement. Analytical folks, they love their data. They love bringing you back to the facts, but they might get a little stuck. If they're disengaged, they might say, well, it's always this way or that way. And conceptuals, they might be overthinking, or they might just say, hey, we don't need to go into those much. Let's just move on, move on. So that might be a disengagement cue. You might have lost them because you're not ideating enough, or you're not bringing them back to the main concept. Okay. Now we're going to learn some lessons from Parrot, mirroring the other's interests. So we want to avoid this habitual tuning out and know what they tune into. And if you want to convince an analytical listener, present stats and facts early on. Now, this is just unique to the analytical listener. All the other listeners you can kind of bring on board as you go. But if you don't grab the analytical listener right away with some credibility, grounding your idea or whatever in facts, they are going to be wondering the rest of your presentation or story, like, where did that come from? Where did they hear that? Where did they get that? How do they know that? And you're going to lose them. So specifically for the analytical listener, you want to present those stats and facts early on. You'll notice, you might notice I did that today when I shot some stats out about listening intelligence in companies right off the bat. And then you can learn about interests from your network or LinkedIn profile. Now, the ecosystem really is about observing over time. if you're in an interview, you don't know these people. And so what you can do is, from an interest perspective, you can go to their LinkedIn profile, read their about, look at their experience. Did they start out in engineering? Did start out in data analysis? I mean, that kind of thing can give you some clues. What did they talk about? Did they talk about the future or the past? Do they talk about ideas and concepts, or are they talking about hard facts? Sometimes it's a little hard to tell because we're all told we need those quantitative and qualitative statements in our profile. So it might be a tough to discern, but you can look at their education, what did they major in? You can see it, are they talking about other people and stakeholders or ideas? So you can maybe discern from their online profiles, like their LinkedIn profile. So know their interests and prepare around that. So let's go into the interests of each one a little bit more. Connective listeners are interested in how information will serve and support others. HR announces a new benefit, and the connective listener goes, "Oh, I wonder how that's going to affect Barbara in this other department." And connective listeners, you can keep them engaged by discussing stakeholder impacts. So you could say, well, these kind of people are going to be affected. If you've worked here this long, then it's this thing. Or if you've been here, you started this year, it's this way. So give them stakeholder impacts and they'll stay engaged. Reflective listeners, they're interested in experience and historical context. So one thing you can do to keep them engaged is give them some time. So do pause and say, "Hey, so-and-so, what do you think about that? This thing, what would you do?" And give them time to answer. Don't let anybody talk over that pause and that space where they're going to give you the answer, or ask them what their experience is. And whoops, we missed analytical. Listeners are interested in results, facts, and accuracy. You said the baseline would be this, and I'm seeing this. So you need to explain that gap to them. And they're going to be probing and asking questions. You want to keep an analytical listener engaged by valuing those probing questions. Say that those are really good questions, are helping to clarify these questions are not about you. I worked as an engineering project manager early in my career, and the engineers would always come and say, "What about this? What about that?" I'm like, gosh, they don't like me. They think I'm dumb. I mean, I would go away feeling like that. And now I realize it wasn't me. They weren't questioning me. They were questioning the information. And then conceptual listeners are interested in the big picture and ideas. If you have a conceptual listener in the room, you keep them focused because on one idea or concept at a time, and bring them back to the big picture. Keep the big picture in the forefront for them. And when I say keep them focused on one idea at a time is, well, I don't know if this is true for every conceptual listener, but I know for me, I've always got 3 or 4 ideas going on in my head any given time. And when I'm listening, I'm connecting this idea with this other idea, nothing to do with what the speaker said, connecting it to an idea over here. Yeah, so keeping them focused on one at a time is a way to keep them engaged regarding their interests. All right, that's all the tips I have for you. These tips will help you hopefully develop some rapport with your key meeting attendees or interviewers, and you can help them get a sense of being heard and therefore increase your chances of buy-in. So I'm willing to take some questions. You can put your questions in the chat. And that's everything I have for you today.
Or if you'd like to not write in the chat, Dori, thank you first off for everything. Wow, so informative. As always, we knew you'd be fabulous.
Thank you, Cindy.
So many takeaways. But if you would like to raise your hand, we can call on you. Maybe that's easier. If anybody's got a question. Drew, I see your hand.
Go ahead, Drew.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Dori. I wanted to ask a question about, especially in these virtual interviews, when you're, let's say, in a panel presentation and you've got a lot of prepared content, it's a kind of hypothetical situation. It's a tough one. And how do you gauge the reactions when, especially when it's let's say it's a sales scenario where you've got an agenda, you're monitoring the time. Can you just give any tips about how to gauge, because you've also got your presentation up, you've got the small people, the small thumbnails up there, and just anything that whether it be daring to say, hey, we're going to dispense with the slides for a few minutes here, anything like that, because I found in these presentations that you can do your social media research, but it's so you might be off in the wrong direction. So is there any other ways to kind of gauge that listener profile, especially in that, I'm gonna say, more challenging situation where you're looking at thumbnails and you're also on the delivering side? So it's
Okay,
a very good question, but anything you want to do if you could respond.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like this is a sales scenario online. And yeah, shutting down the presentation is probably a good idea. Having somebody there with you, and you can just call them a note taker or something like that. But they can be your little secret sauce, making observations, especially if they're dual dominant or triple dominant, then that might be especially good because they're hearing more and they're making observations, and they can private message you and say, maybe even in another app, and say, hey, so-and-so seems disinterested, get them engaged, ask them a question. That might be one, is to have one person shutting off the presentation, being able to look at everybody in there, and then ask for a round robin question and get them to answer. I don't know what the question is, but something to get them engaged. What is your experience on this? What is your thoughts is too general, so not that question. But watch as a question to just watch how they answer, and get their feedback. And what you said, something is your greatest challenge, tell me a story about that. Some things like that, and then observe them and watch them and let them talk a little bit, because that engages them, right? And might give you some clues.
Yeah, I mean, it's even in this situation, I found myself there in the very situation you're in, where I gave a presentation, and right now we have the questions slide up, and I'm, as a listener, really trying to zoom in to see you so I can gauge your reactions, because you're only 1 inch by 1 inch on the screen.
Right.
And in hindsight, I wish now I would just get the slide off the screen, because it's a lot easier to see people. But anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great question. Anybody else have a question? Just shout out. And I think one of the things too that a boot camper brought to me, their experience, they were in a sales presentation on Zoom, which gets to be more difficult, right? And the person leading it was doing a presentation to a client with 45 minutes of a PowerPoint, and they'd lost the client 20 minutes in. And she was like, what should I have done? and because that was her boss giving the presentation, right? Didn't realize he'd lost the client at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dori, I had another question about just reading the listener profiles besides social media. Do you have any other clues about or tips just about how to quickly assess the listener profiles? Is it looking at their body language like you referred to earlier?
Yeah,
Looking at
body
their
language can
profiles,
be a little
personas?
deceptive, right? Because at eye contact and leaning in may not be a cue to engagement. If they're a connective listener, they might habitually do that. And crossing arms and leaning back, that might not mean disengage. So body language can be a little deceptive. If they are, though, hands on top of the table, or you can't see their hands. If they're on Zoom, it's a totally different picture, because you can tell there's obvious disengagement when someone's looking at another screen or looking down, or looking away. But other than that, if they're generally looking toward the camera, it's difficult to tell. So the way to get people engaged is ask questions, get them involved, take polls. Who's asking this, Drew? Is that Drew again,
Yep,
Drew?
that's me.
Drew, if you want to set up a one-on-one, I actually went to a webinar, a free webinar that talked more about this and how to keep online participants engaged. So you've got to use 6 or 7 things within 1 hour: poll, question, where are you from, add your blah, blah, blah in the chat. So you got to do that 6 to 7 times in an hour to keep them engaged. And so, set up a one-on-one with me and we can go over those kind of things.
Thank you.
Yeah. But good, that is really good. Online is a bit hard. Seeing everybody's profile in a thumbnail, it is hard to see if they're engaged. There's obvious disengagement cues, but you can't see their body language. You can't tell my foot's tapping right now. So it's a little bit tough, and you have to do it through their interests. You have to focus on their interests.
Wonderful. Anybody else with a question? Please shout out.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate you summarizing. That's really cool. Yeah, well, people, I want to know something. The folks who were asking about ADHD, can one of you open up your mic or say in the chat, do you think that this listening intelligence is helpful for ADHD?
A silent question.
Maybe we lost them.
I mean,
Yeah, right?
I
We're all very
will
distracted right now. So.
I'll speak up. I've just gone through like a major adult ADHD assessment, right? And I've been learning a lot about the ADHD brain, and it's really incredible. Like the days that I've got like long board meeting or something where I've got to stay super focused and sit still is really hard for me. So actually, they assigned me, medicine to take, and it has made all the difference in the world in helping me to really stay focused and stay listening to what the other person has to say. Because I think I'm also, Dori, as you went through those different types or styles, I can't remember if they were styles or what, but I've been in finance all my life, so I very much have a lot of the analytical, but I'm mostly more like my DISC assessments and everything is, I'm a sales, I'm a people person, but also but the driving thing and how my brain works is that conceptual. And so when you said that your brain, you're listening and you hear a concept and then you're thinking, then your brain starts to think about other concepts and connecting it that's exactly what I'm off. Oh my gosh, this will be really helpful for this person. And I take a note on it. And then I've stopped paying attention. Right. And so really, for me, between my ADHD brain that is gets distracted and inattention deficit, right? Or attention deficit, sorry. That combined with my conceptual style, it makes it really difficult for me to stay attuned if the information being presented is not interesting, right? And I'm constantly pinging one thing off of another and thinking of other ideas. So what I have found helpful for me, and goes back to, grade school, is taking notes, because it's my brain actively staying on track to listen to what you're saying and writing it down. And of course I might fall behind, but people say, oh, you don't have to take notes, just, we'll send you the presentation, but if I'm processing the information that way and taking notes, it really helps me remember what I learned. And then I have the notes to go back, and then also, to stay focused. And I think there's some studies about, once you learn something, if you go back and reflect on it 10 minutes later, and then like 8 hours later, and then 24 hours later, you increase dramatically your brain's ability to retain that information.
That is really great, Tina. And we're a little short on time, but I
Sorry.
love that feedback. And if there's one thing I think that I heard, is that out of listening intelligence, what you can take away is to know that the way your brain works. To take notes is very helpful. When speakers say that, they're not being inclusive of the neurodiverse, but that's okay, and to know that everybody isn't able to focus on everything that is said. And you can even say that. You can say, not everybody knows how listens to everything. And I just missed what you said about what you just said. Can you please repeat it? So that is great. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Tim, did you have something really quick?
Really quick. Yes, I real quick. Being ADD, yeah. Dori, you and I had a one-to-one a few weeks back, and I think I described this to you, but I've learned to look at my days as a game of chess. So each piece, right, is used tactically to work towards a strategy on a chessboard. So I look at my team, I look at my tools at my disposal. Each one of those is a chess piece, and I've got to move them in a tactical fashion to achieve a strategy. And that's just how I've learned how to apply it, and it really worked for me. Right?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And I'm giving everybody here, a special offer today, $100 off an individual session. Please follow me on LinkedIn. I think John or somebody put my LinkedIn profile. Connections are okay. Just please add a note of what brought you to my profile, so I know why we're connecting. And message me to bring listening intelligence training and assessments into your organization. So that's the follow-up for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dori, for everything. We so appreciate all of this. I mean, such good tools, not only for our business world, in communicating with our teams in interviews, but our personal life also. I don't know, my husband says I'm not listening a lot. So I think these are just great takeaways. Thank you. We encourage all of you to reach out to Dori one-on-one if you have a need. And again, we would love to have you back one more time. So we will look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We appreciate our entire community. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Great
Bye.
presentation.